And the Ford Motor Company is planning to make cuts that could result in thousands of workers losing their jobs. As part of its $25.5 billion reorganization, Ford could cut up to 24,000 white-collar jobs across the world.
Something strange is happening in America's car industry, and no one's talking about it enough. Ford factories that used to run day and night are now dead quiet. Car showrooms that once sparkled with brand new vehicles are nearly empty. And thousands of workers? They're being sent home with no answers, no paycheck, and no clue what's next. But this isn't just about slow sales or a bad business plan. No, this is bigger. This is a crisis, and it starts with Ford, one of the oldest and most trusted car brands in America. But the real twist? It ends in Washington, where one decision, just one, shook the entire industry and set off a chain reaction no one was ready for. So what really happened? Let's break it down. It all started when a new tariff policy was announced, one that put a 25% tax on every vehicle and car part not made inside the United States. The goal was to pressure companies into building more at home. But the real-life impact? It forced even American companies to make impossible choices. For Ford, that choice was heartbreaking. In mid-May, without much warning, the company took drastic action. It began shutting down some of its most important assembly plants in the US. These weren't small closures. These were major facilities like the Chicago plant, which once produced the Explorer and Lincoln Aviator in huge numbers. And the Michigan assembly plant, where the Bronco and Ranger were built, also went dark. Thousands of workers were told to stop showing up. There was no clear return date. Some are still waiting. The move shocked the nation. Ford was supposed to be the company that could weather any storm. But now, it was halting production. Not because of a financial collapse, not because of low demand, but because the very supply chain it relied on was falling apart under the weight of new taxes. Interestingly, the cost of doing business suddenly jumped. Ford projected it would lose over $1.5 billion in 2025 because of the tariffs alone. And Ford wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. The entire American auto industry began scrambling. General Motors shifted production schedules, trying to avoid financial damage. Stellantis, the parent company of Dodge and Chrysler, temporarily shut down factories in Canada and Mexico. And many smaller parts suppliers across the Midwest were forced to lay off hundreds of workers in a single week. 900 jobs gone, just like that. For Ford, surviving meant tough decisions. The company started raising prices on popular vehicles like the Mustang Mach-E, Bronco Sport, and Maverick, all built in Mexico. Each vehicle jumped nearly $2,000 in price just to offset the extra tax. But buyers weren't ready for that. Dealerships started to struggle. Cars that were once affordable were now harder to sell. And just as customers began to pull back, inventory started disappearing too. Vehicles that were in demand were no longer available. Meanwhile, Ford's leadership team was doing everything possible to keep the business from breaking. Behind closed doors, emergency plans were being made. They slashed guidance, paused exports, and warned that even more cost-cutting could be on the way. Sadly, Ford completely stopped exporting to China, one of the world's largest auto markets. Vehicles like the Lincoln Nautilus, which were built in China, had become too expensive to compete due to the tariffs. So Ford simply pulled out. The result was clear. The trade war wasn't just some distant policy. It was now reshaping the day-to-day operations of a massive American company. When journalists asked President Donald Trump about the shutdowns, his response surprised many. Rather than showing concern or hinting at any kind of relief, he fully supported the tariffs. He blamed Ford for not bringing production back to the US much earlier. His message was clear. This was about putting America first. That single sentence echoed across every major carmaker's boardroom. If the president didn't see Ford's shutdown as a problem, what chance did other companies have? Back at Stellantis, the company suspended SUV production in Mexico for a full month. Parts stopped moving. Assembly stopped. Workers waited. The impact trickled down to the US, where 5 stamping plants were forced to reduce operations and let more workers go. Even union leaders who usually stood behind the automakers began speaking out. They said this wasn't just about pushing companies to make smarter choices. It was about survival. For some plants, it was already too late. At GM's truck plant in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the company tried to hold the line. They added a shift, hired new workers, reopened parts of the facility that had been inactive. They were racing to build more trucks on American soil in hopes of avoiding the tariffs. It worked, for now. But behind the scenes, everyone knew it was only buying time. Elsewhere, foreign automakers began reacting too. Nissan started canceling US orders for certain models made in Mexico. Toyota delayed shipments. Honda increased prices. The entire system was starting to shake. Then came the final blow to everyday people. Prices soared. In April, new car prices across the country jumped more than 2.5% in a single month, the sharpest spike in years. Customers began rushing to sign papers, trying to lock in prices before the next jump. But what they didn't realize was that even if they wanted to buy, many of the cars were already gone. Ford dealerships were running out of options. Deliveries were behind schedule. Inventory was disappearing. In a bold and desperate move, Ford opened up employee pricing, usually reserved for workers, to the general public. The goal? Move metal, keep money flowing. But even that couldn't keep up with the rising costs of materials, tariffs, and broken supply chains. What of the parts coming from Mexico? They were now 25% more expensive overnight. It wasn't because the quality changed. It was because of new tariffs slapped on imports. Simple items like door handles, engine mounts, and seats that once crossed the border easily were now stuck in warehouses or delayed at checkpoints. That meant higher costs for companies and longer waits for customers. Then there's Canada, America's closest trading partner. For decades, US automakers and Canadian factories worked together like clockwork. Engines made in Ontario would be sent to Michigan. Transmissions from Quebec would be installed in Kentucky. But now, even vehicles made just across the border were being taxed before they could enter the US. It was like putting a toll booth in the middle of a trusted friendship. And China? That's where things really got messy. Components like electric batteries, sensors, and microchips, all critical for modern vehicles, suddenly became up to 30% more expensive. These aren't optional parts. Without them, cars don't run. Factories can't operate. Orders get canceled. Production stops. Even though Ford builds most of its vehicles in the US, it couldn't escape the damage. Why? Because no car is made by just one country anymore. A modern vehicle is a global puzzle made up of thousands of pieces, some from Mexico, some from China, others from Canada, Japan, Germany, and more. It took decades to build this efficient, low-cost network, but it was shattered in just a few months. Factories that once ran 24/7 are now operating at half capacity. Assembly lines are pausing mid-shift, not because of worker shortages, but because a critical part from abroad didn't arrive on time, or now costs too much to use. Suddenly, what used to be a smooth-running system had become a nightmare of delays, price hikes, and confusion. Cars were taking longer to make. They were costing more to build. And as a result, fewer people could afford to buy them. And who got hit the hardest? Not just the companies, but everyday workers. The people assembling the cars, the truck drivers delivering parts, the local mechanics who depended on a steady stream of business, all felt the shock. This wasn't just about economics. It was about livelihoods. Dealerships across the country were left scratching their heads. Where are the vehicles? Why aren't deliveries on time? Why are prices going up when customers are already struggling with inflation, high gas prices, and rising interest rates? The domino effect was in full swing. A tariff here caused a delay there. A delay caused a shortage caused prices to spike. And before anyone could stop it, the system began to collapse under its own weight. What made things worse was that companies like Ford couldn't simply rebuild the supply chain overnight. It takes years to find new suppliers, test their parts, set up transportation, and ensure quality. In the meantime, the damage was already being done. Showroom floors began to look like ghost towns. The new models that used to attract crowds were missing. Salespeople, once busy closing deals, were now checking their phones. Workers at factories were being sent home early, or not called in at all. In short, the US auto industry was being strangled slowly by the very policies meant to protect it. And this was just the beginning. Ford's CEO Jim Farley tried to remain optimistic, describing the situation as the most balanced competition the industry had seen in years. But behind the scenes, the company was making tough decisions, slashing future projects, lowering expectations, and working hard to reassure investors why an iconic American brand was suddenly facing such serious challenges. The damage didn't just affect factories. Workers who once had steady jobs were now facing layoffs for the first time in decades. Local shops, diners, and gas stations that relied on those workers also began to suffer. The economy of these small towns was tied directly to the success of these plants. And now, with the factories shutting down, everything else started slowing down too. Governors in auto-heavy states like Michigan and Indiana began holding urgent meetings. State agencies issued job loss warnings. Mayors publicly pleaded for help. But the message from Washington? Nothing would change. Ford was just the beginning. More companies are feeling the pressure. More workers are being affected. And the road ahead? It's full of uncertainty. The real question is, can the U.S. auto industry survive this storm, or is this the start of something even bigger? Let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more intriguing updates.